At the campsite. A story about a strange experience. A friend and I went camping at a local campground in Ishikawa Prefecture. My friend and I have known each other since junior high school, and although we went to different universities, we kept in touch through Skype and hung out sometimes even after we became university students. The reason we decided to go camping was that we had both been Boy Scouts since elementary school, and although we belonged to different groups, once there was an event at the same campground where Boy Scouts from all over the prefecture gathered and camped together. We didn't know each other at the time, but we were reminiscing about those days and it occurred to me that we had never camped together as a small group. We decided to go camping at the campground during the holidays. My friend's father used to be a Boy Scout troop leader and had a full set of camping equipment, including a tent, so we planned to go to his parents' house in his hometown to get them before heading out. I stopped by his parents' house, collected my sleeping bag and other things, and headed for the campsite. I don't have a driver's license, so my friend drove me to the campground. We arrived at the campground easily and started to set up. We got there around 11 a.m. and there seemed to be no other campers in the campground. I chuckled a little, thinking that even though it was Golden Week, families nowadays don't camp. We used a large tent for the Boy Scouts, which was difficult to set up at the time, but the two adults were able to do it with ease. After that, we had our usual barbecue, where we grilled meat, vegetables, and yakisoba noodles that we had bought at the supermarket. We made curry for supper and enjoyed the nature, and I started to get a little sleepy. After putting out the fire, we went into the tent and started to take a nap using our sleeping bags as pillows. I think I woke up around 9 p.m. I had started sleeping around 4 p.m., so I must have slept for about 5 hours. It's weird to keep calling him friend, so from then on I'll call my friend Aoki. Is Aoki already at dinner? He woke up sleepwalking, but when he checked the time on his cell phone, he was surprised to see that he had overslept. When the two of us went outside for the time being, the grass around us was slightly wet, as if it had rained. I wondered if it was because it was usual for the grass to be wet with morning dew when we woke up in the morning at camp, and I did not pay much attention to it at the time, but something strange may have already started happening around this time. I had to reheat the curry and cook rice in the rice cooker, so I decided to start the fire. It was already dark outside, and I was a little startled and rushed to wake up my friend. When I was a Boy Scout, we were only allowed to use matches, but now we have lighters, chuckermans, and all sorts of other things. I brought charcoal from inside the tent and started to light the fire. The fire was lit safely, but it was darker than I expected, so I decided to light a lantern. But I had left some white gasoline in the car, and my friend had to go to the car with a flashlight in hand to get it. Even though there was a firelight, I was still somewhat uneasy about being alone in the dark mountain forest. My friend said, "Don't worry, it's not a bear, it's a deer." He disappeared into the darkness with a laugh. I wrote friend as if it was a habit. Except for the sound of bubbles coming out of the rice cooker and charcoal crackling and burning, the only sounds were the wind and trees scraping against each other. As the curry heated up and smelled good, people's fears faded and their appetites grew, perhaps because they were hungry. I found myself muttering to myself that the space that had frightened me so much earlier was now a camp with a certain elegance. At that time, I heard what sounded like an animal call coming from deeper in the forest. I think it sounded like a cat, with a nuanced meow. But there are no cats in the mountains, right? But I had seen a deer at this campsite before, so I assumed it was a deer or something, and stirred my curry. After a while, I heard another meow. Next time, the end of the word was kind of rounded, like meowing. I wondered if it was a real abandoned cat. In today's depopulated world, some people may go all the way to the mountains to dump their cats. I have never owned a cat, but I like cats. I was thinking that if I told Aoki about this, he might go looking for them, since he loves cats so much that he has 2 of his own. Aoki is a little fat, so I thought he was jumping up and down to scare me and was heading this way. "Aoki?" I called out, "Aoki?" But there was no answer and the sound continued for a long time. While I was curious as to what was causing the sound, I didn't have the courage to go check it out. When I was texting Aoki on my cell phone, I found that the light from the flashlight was heading this way. I saw the light of a flashlight coming toward me. Aoki came back from the opposite direction of the sound. Aoki asked me, "You don't look well, did you have a stomach ache?" I told him what had happened. I told her what had happened, but she brushed it off as nothing more than the wind shaking the trees. After a while, the rice was cooked and steamed, so I poured curry over it and ate it. Maybe it was my imagination, but the sound seemed to be getting louder and louder. I asked Aoki if the sound was getting louder, and he responded with a serious look on his face that he was sure it was, unlike before. I had been told in advance that there was a possibility of bears, and I thought there was a possibility of bears, so I decided to try to scare them by playing the TV on my cell phone's 1 seg channel at high volume and making metallic noises with my rice container and pots and pans. First of all, the 1 segment TV that we had been able to watch during the day was not working for both of us. We were both a little impatient at first, but soon began to focus on the metallic sound, thinking that, well, we were in the mountains and the signal was probably unstable. Then the sound of stepping on grass that had been going on for a long time was cut off, and I heard a voice like a baby crying. I was horrified for a moment, but Aoki, who has a cat, laughed and sat down, saying, "See, it's a cat in heat." But I still couldn't stop sweating. I suggested, "Why don't we sleep in the car today?" I suggested to Aoki that we sleep in the car, but he didn't take me up on the offer, and we ended up sleeping in the tent. The cries are still coming from outside. I was so creeped out by the voice that I begged Aoki to keep the lantern light outside the tent and the light inside the tent on all night. Aoki laughed and said he was still scared, but agreed. We both got into our sleeping bags. After about 30 minutes of saying good night to each other, Aoki said, "Shut up." I yelled out with my face outside the tent. Then, after the cries stopped, there was a cracking sound like a branch breaking. Then Aoki quickly put his face back in the tent and looked at me. I asked him, "What is it?" I asked him what he meant, but he only replied, "There's something here." At first I thought he was making a joke to scare me even more, but then I realized he was joking. But Aoki's seriousness made me realize that he was not lying. I also felt the presence of something around the tent. It was both of us at the same time, and it was definitely not a cat, but something large. There were sounds of branches breaking and grass being trampled all around us. Aoki suggested that we sleep in the car for the night in case it was a bear, and I immediately agreed. But I still had a feeling that there was something around the tent, so I couldn't get out of the tent. I asked Aoki if he saw anything when he put his face out of the tent, but he said he would have known if there had been something there because of the light from the lantern, but he said he didn't see anything. He said he just felt something looking at him right after he heard a branch break. He said he felt something watching him right after he heard the sound of a branch breaking. It may have only been a few minutes, but it felt like a very long time to be inside the small tent, feeling the presence of the outside world. Suddenly, the noise stopped and a clicking sound like a clucking of tongues began. Then I heard a sound like an intake of breath. Aoki got numb or loud. I didn't want to stay in the tent by myself. So I followed him outside, but when I looked around, I didn't see anyone. I looked around and saw nothing, but I definitely felt something watching me. Anyway, Aoki suggested that we take our valuables to the car, sleep in the car, come back at dawn, clean up, and leave early. I decided to leave the tent site with only my cell phone and wallet in my pocket, Aoki with a lantern and me with a flashlight. All this time I felt something watching me, I don't know where, but I felt something watching me. As Aoki was about to walk away with the lantern, he said to me, "Hey." I looked at the spot illuminated by the lantern and saw something crawling there. I looked at the spot illuminated by the lantern and saw what looked like something had crawled there. The grass had been trampled and it looked like an animal trail. I had not walked in that direction during the day, but it was near the desk where I had left the lantern, so it must have been in my line of sight many times, and I noticed something strange. At any rate, we were too scared to check what was crawling on the ground, so we both took a short run to the parking lot, which was about 6 minutes from our tent site. The only sounds were our own footsteps and the wind rustling the grass and trees. However, I could still feel that look on my back. It was as if they were following us from behind. But I was too scared to turn around. We managed to get to the car safely, started the engine, and tried to calm ourselves down by listening to some music. When the engine started and the music started, both of us sighed and leaned back in our seats, as if the tension had been lifted at once. I sat in the driver's seat and I sat in the passenger seat. I locked the door from the inside, and I guess I was relieved to know that we were in an enclosed space. I don't think I even felt their eyes on me. I don't remember what time it was, but after an hour or so, perhaps because we were both tired from the strange tension, we decided to go to bed, turned off the engine, left my flashlight on in the back seat, and fell asleep. How long had I been asleep when I heard a tick-toc sound from outside and felt that look again? Unfortunately, I was leaning against the window and could see out. My flashlight was not on, probably because the batteries were dead. I was afraid to look outside, so I turned over and tried to move my body, but I couldn't move. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I could feel their eyes on me in the darkness. As my eyes became accustomed to the darkness, I saw 3 eyeballs. I passed out. I woke up in the morning. It was already about 9 o'clock. Aoki was not yet awake, so I shook him to wake him up and he jumped up in surprise. I tried to tell Aoki what had happened last night, and he started to tell me almost the same thing. Aoki and I were sleeping with our backs to each other, and Aoki said he saw 3 eyeballs from the window on the other side of the bed. Would we have the same dream no matter how many scary experiences we had a while back? We could assure each other that we weren't dreaming, that it really happened. Anyway, the sun was already fully up, so we both went back to our tent site with trepidation. There we both felt an inexpressible fear. The trail we had seen yesterday, which looked like something had crawled on top of us, was following a circle around our tent. We were scared to death, but we couldn't just leave, so we quickly cleaned up and jumped in the car to go back to my parents' house. I still don't know what that was all about. Both Aoki and I are still living healthy. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.